Hey guys, Board now back with you for my latest review of The X-Files, the original series, and this is going to be episode 8 of the first season. It is called Ice, and we have a pretty big creative team on this one, some X-Files mainstay. The episode is written by Glenn Morgan and James Wong. Who I think wrote the previous one actually, but they do write a lot of the big meaty X-Files episodes. And the director is David Nutter. Great name, of course. That only makes sense if you live in the UK, probably, because Nutter is like an expression for someone who's lost their marbles, basically, in the UK. It's one of those sort of old-fashioned, unflattering terms for someone with a few screws loose, but it's a great name anyway. David Nutter, who's really quite a big name when it comes to TV directing and involvement. So, and I know he does become a mainstay on the X-Files as well. I think this might be his first episode as director. I don't remember him directing any others before this. So Ice is one of those episodes that definitely stands out to me from the first season. I always remember it being a favourite of mine, not only from the first season, but maybe the show in general. And the premise is very sort of simple. At the beginning we see it's set in like the Arctic sort of thing in Alaska and on this like research sort of base. And we see basically two men basically losing their minds. And so one of them is like recording a message into like the camera kind of thing. And he's like spouting off some like sort of nonsensical sort of cryptic sort of message for the sake of the video. And then we see him and the other guy basically sort of turn on each other, but they've both got guns and they both like kill each other. And so Mulder and Scully are called in to investigate, and they're called in alongside these two scientists and a third scientist, so sort of outside involvement. And they're told to go and travel to this place, so it's out in this sort of like remote sort of region, to investigate just exactly what's going on and how this can be explained. And we soon find out then the two guys who we saw at the beginning of the episode have been infected by this unknown virus, and it kind of made them go sort of crazy. And we find out also then certainly one of them, I think, was kind of almost sacrificing himself to maybe to kind of keep the virus contained in that area, rather than he could have, sort of left there and potentially risked spreading it. So, but he also recorded the video, obviously, to get the message out there to say, hey, this is a serious deal. The world needs to be aware of that. So there's that kind of vibe. So as I said, Mulder Scully travelled to this place with the two scientists, or the three scientists actually. You get two in a pair, which is played by Alexandra Berkeley, or Xander Berkeley I should say, one of those character actors you'll see in a lot of different things, film, TV. I think he was in Candyman, but he's certainly a familiar face. You would have seen him in a lot of stuff. Very kind of versatile like character actor, and he's also with a character, Nancy, played by Felicity Hoffman, a very young Felicity Hoffman, so long before she was in Desperate Housewives and a couple of other things. She appears in the X-Files era, and early X-Files, so yeah, she looks very young in this episode. And the other scientist who they go with to investigate this is played by Steve Heitner, who Seinfeld fans will recognise as Kenny Banner, like the aspiring, annoying comedian who always rubs Cherry up the wrong way, and he normally plays quite nerdy, goofy type characters because he was also in Roswell and he was playing that sort of character there. So yeah, you've got a bit of a cast in this, a bit of a like character actors, and adding some sort of oomph to it for want of a better term. But that's the whole setup. It's them in this base in Alaska, them trying to identify just what this virus is and how it's spreading, and the kind of paranoia starts to like sort of sink in quite deeply, and it has this very like thriller type vibe to it as things slowly escalate, and it's largely about the characters and their interactions and who can you trust, and yeah, kind of, as I said, the paranoia. And yeah, it's a really good episode. It's one that holds up very strongly. I really love the setting. I love some of the themes. I think the look of it is pretty good. I guess there are certain moments where you can tell it's on a low budget. I think sometimes when you have like a shot of like the outside and you've got obviously in this Arctic conditions, I think that looks a bit phony. That doesn't look quite like they're in the Arctic sort of thing. And there's one or two effects during the episodes, like it's revealed eventually that these worms are sort of causing it, and at one point we get a look at the worms and they look very kind of ropey. They don't look like real sort of parasites. So there's one or two moments like that maybe let it down a little bit, but in general it's a really tight episode. It's really well plotted and paced, and it does look quite good. The set itself, them in this like sort of laboratory and this base and all the little like props and what have you. It feels very like nuts and bolts science fiction, and because it is all condensed into like the one location, and it's about, as I said, the tension and the paranoia and the characters like bouncing off each other, then I think it does have that sort of good sort of condensed, like almost stage play sort of feel to it. I think it looks really good, and you've got a reliable cast. So I think the guest stars really add something to the mix as well. And I like some of the themes of thinking about X-Files and science fiction. I like the fact that you've got this idea of and it's been explored a little bit on the show before, but like human beings away from society, in this remote sort of location. And obviously there's an explanation for their actions in this, but it's this sense of they're away from society and they're almost like becoming like animals themselves. They're behaving like animals because of certain things, these conditions and certain infections. But there's quite a nice metaphor going on there. And as I said, there's some great casting, but I think one of the things I noticed is that the characters like the Alexandra Berkeley and Felicity Hoffman character, that they, from the start, they look pale and sort of dull-eyed from the beginning, and I think that really sets up the mood very nicely, because you have these characters who are very like worn down, very kind of haggard, really, and you get this sense of obviously them winding each other up just unintentionally, but just little things like really bug and get them to snap at each other, and that obviously plays into the paranoia and the tension. And one touch I did like is then the Berkeley character insists on seeing like ID from Mulder and Scully, and obviously us, the others. So I like that from the start. Then he's cautious to do that, and yeah, there's almost like this thing about, because Mulder and Scully are like FBI agents, and these are scientists called from the outside. They're working for different like companies, so it's almost like there's a little bit of a rivalry there already, a bit of like an inter-promotion sort of rivalry. So I quite like that sense, the dynamic with Hoffman and Berkeley's character, and then Fox and Dana. It's a little bit different with Steve Heitner's character, Danny. He's a bit more laid back, he's a bit more sort of chilled out, and he's quite accommodating. One touch I liked about his character is there's this recurring theme where he listens to like sports games on his like one of those radios, you know, where you have like the earpieces, and he does this throughout, but it's not new sports game, it's like classic. I can't remember if it was football or baseball or something, but it's classic sports games. And he says, I just do it just to relax me, to unwind. And so he constantly has that on when he's doing like experiments and stuff. So I quite like that as an idea, and the horrors of the world and the threat sort of thing. He's tuned into like this radio and classic sort of sports game. You can almost apply that to like the modern day with sort of iPods and stuff. It's a way to escape and to take our minds off things. So that's pretty cool. As I said, good cast. You also have a small part for Jeff Kober, who's another really sort of underrated character actor. He appeared in a couple of episodes of Buffy. Well, 2 or 3, but he plays like a different character. And you see him pop up and stuff. He normally plays quite aggressive, sort of like, or villain type characters. And his name's Bear, which is quite fitting, but he just plays like the pilot in this who agrees to fly them out. And he sort of puts Berkeley's character in his place, because he's like, hey man, I'm the only one willing to fly you out. That's my credentials. So he's kind of like, yeah, screw it, I'm not giving you my credentials. And he sort of calls his bluff on that. But yeah, he has this great look of like this sort of scruffy type rock star. But he doesn't last very long, because he gets infected quickly and he tries to hide it from everyone, basically. And there's some quite nice practical effect, you know, when we see him being affected, when we see like the worms like moving through his body and stuff. I think those basic effects were well done and kind of freaky and kind of awkward. But they're actually introduced. This dog comes out of nowhere. They first get there and the dog's freaking out, and we find out that the dog has been affected, and that's the whole thing. But I quite like the way they use the dog throughout the episode, because they use it as part of the experiment, because they like the dog eventually passes the worms, and we find out then, or they discover then, if you have a host and you have 2 worms in that one host, then that is a way to sort of contain it and kill it potentially. So that's quite a nice little touch. One other thing I also quite like, that at the start Mulder is told then they have 3 days clearance. When it comes to weather, they've got 3 days to kind of get the job done and get out of there. But I quite like setting up rules like that, and it sort of adds to the tension. It gives this great focus. So I think that's what I like about this episode, the focus on it, the fact you have rules, the fact it's almost very simple, but it's almost, you've got these really juicy sort of character stuff and a really fine, slow burning plot where you do have kind of twists along the way. And then, of course, that kind of changes that 3-day situation, because it just changes, because apparently the weather gets worse, but that kind of increases things. So I like stuff like that. Then they can sort of play with but yeah, there's all sorts of great character drama in this. Like basically, Mulder is suspected at one point, and he finds Danny dead, basically. But the clever thing is, we don't see what happens. So the scientists are kind of suspicious. Well, did he kill him? He's saying, he could have attacked him without knowing if he was infected. So there's all sorts of stuff where Scully, kind of being fair to everyone, she has to try and lock Mulder away while they're trying to figure things out. And then there's all sorts of back and forth between them because the scientists are saying, well, we can't risk letting him go if he is infected. And Scully does come to like Mulder's aid, which is kind of like sweet. But it really becomes a bit of a dilemma. But yeah, there's all sorts of like odd sort of like partnerships and this kind of weird dynamic, and the paranoia really sort of kicks in and stuff. And there's little bits of humour because at one point they're all testing each other, and so Mulder kind of says, well, remember, this is the Arctic, folks, so don't judge or something about like his body. That's a pretty funny line. But yeah, it gets to the point where they know it's one of the four of them who's been infected and who's been like killed Danny, for example. And they do quite a good job of keeping that suspense up. I think you can maybe guess that it's not going to be Mulder. Like maybe that would be too obvious, but obviously they do plant that seed, and yeah, it actually turns out to be the Hoffman character, the Nancy character. That's a real swerve because basically they band together, Nancy and I can't remember Berkeley's character's name, but they band together, and I think Nancy, it's odd because she's a bit more sympathetic to Mulder, but anyway, as I was saying, they do sort of work together and they attack, Mulder and Scully. But I think Berkeley's just doing it because he's convinced that one of them are like they're affected, sort of thing. So, whereas Nancy's obviously doing it because she is infected. But yeah, eventually they sort of like they kind of wrestle back control, and obviously when Berkeley's character realizes, he helps them, and they send the dog and the and Nancy to quarantine basically. But in classic X-Files sort of fashion, the base is then destroyed because Mulder's like, I want to go back there. Those worms are still there. That infection's still there. Actually, another interesting point which I've skipped over, which I should probably mention, is the debate between Mulder and Scully in how to handle this. Because at one point, Scully basically wants to just kill the infection, to kill the virus. Her logic is, then yeah, we can't risk it getting out. We have to contain it. So basically destroy the worms. But Mulder's more like, and I think this really fits like Mulder's character. He's more like, yeah, but what about the overall, the threat to society, and we have to have this knowledge so that we can like sort of research this stuff and experiment. So it's quite an interesting alternative like idea from Mulder. It's like thinking of the bigger picture, whereas Scully, I think, is more about the mission, the case, and about just dealing with stuff in a more rational kind of way. Whereas Mulder, obviously, it's in his character to like think outside the box, or I mean, not so much that, because I think Scully would as well. if the situation was right. But I think it's in Mulder's nature, maybe the fascination with this stuff, and he might sort of think a bit broader in that sense. So that's a really interesting bit as well. But yeah, we get to that stuff at the end, and the Berkeley scientist says, "Oh, didn't you hear the whoever it was, the government like destroyed the base not long afterwards." And another thing is that Mulder thinks then it might have been some sort of like spacecraft or aliens which like dropped the worms to Earth, basically. And it's based on this study he did. But I really like the end line actually, where Mulder says, "They're still there, Scully, 2,000 years down in the ice," which is a great line. You can almost imagine that being a line on a movie poster, and Scully's like, simply leave them there. And I love that, just her sort of rationale. Leave them there, it's not worth it, Fox. Let's go home. That's great stuff. So I think the episode works so well and is so gripping because of the character stuff and because of how tense the situation is and the story. And as I said, there's some nice twists and turns. So good casting as well. So really great stuff. Really strong episode. Yeah, I'll give it an 8 out of 10. I was going to go a bit higher, but I suppose maybe because of some of the budget restrictions and occasionally the look. But it is very strong. It's a very strong 8 out of 10, I think. It's a standout episode for me. I know the first season might not be the best, but it's one that I sort of come back to quite a lot. I think it may be one of my favourite episodes of the show, not just the first season, but we'll see how that pans out. But I really like Ice, and obviously it's got that classic feel of The Thing, Carpenter's The Thing from 1982. It definitely has a similarity where you've got similar situation, similar setup, and obviously you've got this kind of cast of the somber characters like bouncing off each other. So it has a similar feel to The Thing, or maybe Alien in a way. But you could see maybe how it was inspired by The Thing. So yes, 8 out of 10, and not surprisingly from how I've been talking, it's going to the top of the list, so just above Squeeze, which squeezes down to number 2, if you excuse the pun. But Ice, yeah, definitely the best episode so far, in my opinion. But if you disagree, let me know in the comments below, like and subscribe, and keep this sort of content coming, new TV reviews as well as older reviews such as The X-Files. I also do Buffy reviews from time to time, so I'm working my way through that series, and also Gilmore Girls, so a few like classic older shows on the go. But I'll return soon with more X-Files. The next review will be obviously episode 9, and it's an episode called is it Space? Yeah, Space, simply Space. So we had a one word episode title this time, Ice, and then Space. So Space will be the next review coming up soon. See you guys later. Goodbye.